the Literary Princess, and today I am doing the Victorian Literature Journey tag. This was created for October by Roz from Scallydandling About the Books and Tilly from Tilly's Shelf. They adapted it from the Shakespeare Journey tag, which I did last month. So there are 9 questions. Let's jump in. Question number 1, what was your first experience reading Victorian literature and how was it? So, I would say that I first read some children's classics that I would generally consider Victorian literature, although they're kind of also not. So the first would be A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which was published after the Victorian period as a full novel. However, it was published as a short story, I believe in 1884. So I do consider this Victorian literature. I read this as a child with my mom and I really loved it. It's actually my favorite children's book. So that was a great experience. Technically it's not Victorian literature, but technically it is. And the same can be said for Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. So Peter Pan was originally featured in a 1902 story, The Little White Bird, something like that. Hold on, let me look it up. Yes, so it is The Little White Bird in 1902, which is technically just a year after the Victorian era ended. And honestly, in academia, we kind of consider the Victorian period to have kind of extended a little bit past Victoria's death, just because it kind of did, stylistically and whatnot. So the Peter Pan, as we know it here, would be from the 1911 novel, Peter and Wendy. So again, sort of Victorian, but sort of not. I also read this with my mother as a child, and I really loved it. But the first official Victorian book that I actually remember reading is Oliver Twist when I was 10 years old with my grandmother, and this was a horrible experience. She forced me to read it while I was staying with her for the summer. She then proceeded to make me watch multiple film adaptations and attend a play adaptation. So by the time I was done with this, I just really hated Oliver Twist. And then I got to 6th grade, you know, in the fall, and they were like, we're gonna read Oliver Twist. And I was like, no. So my first experience with an official Victorian book was super negative, actually. And I thought that I hated Dickens for the longest time. I didn't like this book until my master's degree. I realized that Dickens was fine during my undergrad, but I did not reread Oliver Twist until my master's degree. And I like Oliver Twist perfectly fine, like good book, cool, but such a bad experience. Question number 2, has the reading of a Victorian book ever brought you to tears? If so, tell us more. Yes. I sobbed the first time I read Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. I was a mess. I was at school too. I read this when I was in my sophomore year of high school, so I was 15. And I remember just going to my lit teacher's office and being like, yeah! Because I was not okay, because this book is really sad. I think it was the very end that ultimately made me cry. The rest just kind of made me angry. You'll be getting a rant later this month about my least favorite characters in Victorian literature and about how much I hate Angel Clare, which I've already ranted about, I think last Victober, but I'll happily rant about it again. But the very end of this did make me cry a lot. Question number 3, are there any people who have played a significant role in your Victorian literature journey? Yes, and it's actually one of the same people who played a significant role in my Shakespeare journey, my Aunt Pat. She is my grandmother's sister, and she actually gave me a lot of my first Victorian books. She actually gave me this copy of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, along with this copy of Jude the Obscure, She gave me my absolute favorite book, Wuthering Heights, which I'm going to put back down here because it's the answer for another question. And she also gave me The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. So she played a huge role just in my classics journey in general, but she's the one that gave me these Victorian books that I realized I was absolutely in love with. I'm sure she gave me a few others. Oh, she gave me that copy of Peter Pan, actually. And I'm sure she gave me others, but these are the ones that I really remember her giving to me. So she played a very significant part in my journey. My dissertation is actually going to be dedicated to her. She passed away in 2017, I believe. So very grateful to her, because otherwise I would not be doing what I do now. Question number 4. Do you have a favorite film or TV adaptation of a Victorian book? What about one you'd like to see made? So I do have a favorite, and that would be North and South, a 2004 BBC miniseries, I believe, starring Richard Armitage as Mr. Thornton, and I straight up don't know the name of the woman who plays Margaret Hale, but she does a great job. I love this miniseries. I know that's super basic to say, everybody loves this miniseries, but it's so good. I really love it a lot. And I should rewatch it. One that I would like to see made, how about a good adaptation of Wuthering Heights? No, but really. But for one that there has never been an adaptation, I would absolutely love to see a film adaptation of Miss Marchbanks by Margaret Oliphant in the style of the 2019 Emma, directed by somebody. Excuse me, I guess it's the 2020 Emma. I forgot that it came out right before the pandemic. Directed by Autumn de Wilde. I think that style would be so perfect for Miss Marchbanks. And I would just absolutely love that. Somebody please make it. Please, I will pay you money. Please. I want it so badly. And also, I think we just need more variety in the Victorian adaptations that we get, instead of them trying to remake Great Expectations for the umpteenth time, or butchering Wuthering Heights for the bazillionth time. Like, just try something new. Try Miss Marchbanks, please, I'm begging you. Question number 5, which character in Victorian literature most resembles you, or you identify with the most? So I guess I will say Jane Eyre from Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Although I actually don't think that, like, I would have said this in high school and college. I don't think she really resembles me that much anymore. I do find her very easy to relate to, but I don't know who else it would be other than Jane Eyre. But I did feel a very strong connection with Jane Eyre when I read this in high school. And her feeling just kind of poor, little, and plain, and obscure. I related to that very much. So I would say she's still probably the most relatable character in Victorian literature I've come around, but I don't know if I necessarily still resemble her that much. But again, I don't know who I would say otherwise. So, question number 6, do you have a favorite moment, scene, or line from Victorian literature? Tell us about it or read it to us. So I do. It's from Wuthering Heights, and it's not one you're going to expect. Like, I have a lot of favorite quotes from Wuthering Heights. I have a whole video of my top 10 quotes, and there is one from Wuthering Heights in that. But like, for actual favorite moments in a Victorian book, it's completely different from my favorite quote. And it's like this extremely stupid throwaway moment, but it's also hilarious. And this is right at the beginning when Mr. Lockwood comes to Wuthering Heights for the second time, and he meets Catherine Linton Heathcliff. And he's talking with her. There are dogs around. And so he says, in reference to one of the dogs, and he says this to Catherine, "A beautiful animal," I commenced again. Do you intend parting with the little ones, madam?" "They are not mine," said the amiable hostess, more repellingly than Heathcliff himself could have replied. "Ah, your favorites are among these," I continued, turning to an obscure cushion full of something like cats. "A strange choice of favorites," she observed scornfully. "Unluckily, it was a heap of dead rabbits." It's just so stupid. He's such an idiot. I love him. So yeah, that's my favorite moment in Victorian literature because it's hilarious and it makes me laugh every time. And I just love how dumb he is. And Emily Bronte is not given enough credit for how actually funny she is. Everyone's like, "Oh, Wuthering Heights, so angsty." Unfortunately, it was a heap of dead rabbits. Question number 7, does any Victorian literature intimidate you? If so, what and why? So you would think no, because the answer for this for Shakespeare was like, no, I'm not intimidated by Shakespeare anymore. I've read so much of him, I'm like, whatever. There's still Victorian literature that intimidates me, despite the fact that I've read so much of it and I'm getting a degree in it. And one of these is despite me having read it already, it still intimidates me. And that is Middlemarch by George Eliot. I call this book my nemesis because it took me like 4 tries to get through it the first time around. And I didn't really love it. It's just so big. It's like 800 pages. It's intimidating. And even though I've read it before, I'm going to be rereading it sometime early next year for my George Eliot project. And I'm like, kind of scared of it. It just scares me. I don't know. George Eliot is a complex writer, and this book is just so long. Ugh. But the other type of literature that would intimidate me is actually Victorian poetry. So for this, I have The Idylls of the King by Alfred Lord Tennyson. I'm intimidated by poetry in general. I would say, with the exception of Shakespeare, since Shakespeare is technically written all in poetry, that doesn't bother me. I can deal with poetry when it's like pre-1750 usually. I'm like fine, and then at the moment that it gets to the point where novels would be being published, I'm just like, why didn't you write a novel? The Idylls of the King does kind of intimidate me, even though my favorite poem is actually The Lady of Shalott. So you'd think I wouldn't be that scared of Tennyson's poems, but no, I'm intimidated. I just don't get on with poetry very well. I'll get to it someday. Today's not that day. Question number 8, what tips would you give to someone early on in their Victorian literature journey? So, I guess I would say start small. There are a lot of Victorian short stories and short novels. Like, don't just go in for Middlemarch immediately, because that's kind of, I mean, I guess do that if you really want to, but I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. Start with something short, like maybe The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which is one of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Sherlock Holmes stories are a great place to start in general. Go for maybe Jane Eyre is a good one to start with. It's not super short, but it's like 400 pages. It's not like an 800th page behemoth. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, another really short one. Just maybe start small and then build your way up to a behemoth like Middlemarch instead of just jumping straight in to Middlemarch. Another tip I would say is that there is such a wide variety of Victorian authors, so don't feel just because maybe you didn't like the Brontes or you didn't like Dickens, don't feel that you need to be like, well, I don't like Victorian literature as a whole because of that. There are so many other authors out there that we don't hear about as much who are fantastic. Anthony Trollope is great, Margaret Oliphant is great, and there's just so many more. Charlotte Mary Young, and there's just this whole list of people to enjoy. So just because you're like, well, I didn't like Jane Eyre, so I don't like Victorian literature, don't limit yourself. Try some of these others, some of these lesser known ones, because they are so good. So that would be my 2 tips. Start small and don't limit yourself. Question number 9, what is your top recommended read for other readers of Victorian literature? So this is hard because, you know, for a lot of people who are really into Victorian literature, they're gonna have read like all the heavy hitters. So the one that I would really say, if you haven't tried her, you should give her a go because she's very underrated, is Ouida. Okay, I'm writing my dissertation partly on her. This is Moths. This was the first book I read by her. Yes, it's fairly large, but give it a try. It's so much fun. Ouida is just really fun. And I think if you love Victorian literature, but you've read like most of the big, you know, the big names, and you're like, who should I try next? Give Ouida a go. Give Ouida a try. I love her. She's so good. So that is my Victorian literature journey tag. I would love to hear some of your answers, either down in the comments below or in a video of your own. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.